Our first little dummy application, which is still missing a lot of features, no worries, but our first little dummy application is slowly taking shape. At the moment, we have a problem though. Once we're done going through our questions, we get an error, and that's not really the kind of user experience you typically would want to deliver. Instead, it would be nicer if we show our column here with questions and answers as long as we do have questions, but as soon as we exhausted our list of questions, it would be nicer to show some other output, some message like you did it, or a final score, or anything like that. To achieve this, there are two things which I want to do. So what I want to do is I want to output different widgets once we exhausted our questions. So instead of having a column of questions and answers, I want to show, let's say, a centered text which says you did it for a start. We can change this later, but for a nice start, why don't we use that? Hence, we kind of need a if check here for the value we pass to body, right? Because we either pass this column here with our question and our answers, as long as we do have questions, or we show something else. It's a so-called ternary expression, and this is also a feature which exists in other programming languages. It's basically a single line if check. But speaking of that, we haven't really learned about if checks at all, right? So let's first of all start with what if means. The if keyword can be used in our code if we want to run some code conditionally. Let's say here an answer question. Then we can add the if keyword here, and then a condition between parentheses, and then curly braces to surround the code that only should run if this condition is met. And here our condition could be that we compare the question index to our list of questions, or to the length of this list. So we could check if question index, which starts at 0, is smaller than questions length. However, now we have the problem that questions is a constant which is defined here in the build method, and therefore, I already mentioned that Dart has a feature called scoping. It is scoped to this method. It's treated as a variable or a constant that's only available in the build method, but not in the entire class. Well, the solution is relatively easy though. You simply take that entire list and move it out of build and add it as a variable or as a constant to the overall myAppState class, like this. Now here, however, we get an error that only static fields can be declared as const. So basically Dart doesn't allow const here on the class level. There are two solutions. We could add the static keyword in front of that to fix this. Now Dart is happy. Or you change this to final and maybe just add const here to make it really clear that this list will never change. Both is okay. I will go for final and then here my const value. Now questions is a property of this class and we can use it anywhere in the class, including this function. With that, back to this if check. Here I'm having a Boolean comparison. I'm comparing questions index to the question's length. And what this does is if the length here, let's say that is 3, if that is greater than the question index, then this here will return true. Because I'm checking if question index is smaller than question length, and this question has two possible answers, true or false. And this is another important type in Dart, which I haven't mentioned before, a Boolean. A Boolean is true or a Boolean is false. It's a specific type, bool, which is built into Dart, and it really only has these two values, true or false. And therefore it's awesome for if checks. This here automatically yields a Boolean. This expression here, thanks to this comparison operator, yields true if this condition is met and yields false otherwise. And we only make it into this if block here if this here resolves to true. We could also check for if true, then this code here would always execute, but of course that's a bit of a meaningless check. The same would be true for if false, then this code here would never execute. Instead here you want to have a comparison or a sum check that can sometimes return true and sometimes return false. Besides the smaller than operator, you also have greater than, smaller than or equal, greater than or equal, so the two values have to be equal, or not equal. These are other operators you can use here, but here I want to check, is the question index smaller than question's length? This means that since we have 3 items in questions, this here always is free, because again, questions here is a list with 3 maps. So question's length always is free. Question index starts at 0. Then this condition would be true because 0 is smaller than 3. So for the first button click, this is true, and we make it into the if block. And then we change question index to be 1. So for the second time we click a button, this also is true because 1 is smaller than 3. Then we change it to 2, and therefore for the third time, this is also true. So what I actually want to do here is I want to print we have more questions. However, as I just explained, this even is true if we have no more questions, because we check before we change the index. So we should actually move that to the end of that so that we first changed question index before we check if we then have more questions. But with that, if we now restart the app, what should happen is that when we click a button, is that we see we have more questions twice for the first 2 button clicks, but thereafter, for the third button click, we see no output. So if I now scroll up here above the error, we indeed see we have more questions twice, but after the third click, we no longer see that. Now that's a normal if check. How can we now bring that down there into our widget tree?